Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Stress Related Diseases and How to Manage Them. This webinar is brought to you by BioBalance, your health optimization and personalized supplementation partner. The pandemic has grossly affected our way of life, causing all sorts of stress from mental and emotional to physical and even financial. 1 year in, it is critical that we learn how to manage these stressors and thrive. Through this webinar, we aim to share practical tips to detect early signs of stress and simple lifestyle practices that we can incorporate to restore balance amidst these various stressors. Our guest speaker today is a resident consultant at BioBalance and is the first Filipino certified in functional medicine by the Institute of Functional Medicine USA. He is also European double board certified in nutritional medicine and anti-aging medicine. He recently finished his fellowship in integrative medicine in the University of Arizona. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure to present to you Dr. Stanley Chua.
Hi, good morning, everybody. So our topic for today is about stress and stress-related disorders. Because a lot of us are encountering this problem day in and day out, especially given the situation we are in right now. So just by asking you this question, who among you feel this way, that they are so tired of being sick and tired? And a lot of people that I encounter daily do have this expression that, for some reason, I'm just tired all the time and I keep getting sick. And this is one of those early signs that your body is undergoing a lot of stress and is undergoing a lot of pressure. No? Usually we fall under this, we have this cycle of stress. Initially there's some form of initiating stressful event, whether it's divorce, annulment, separation from family, a big fight, death, grieving. Any stressful event is usually the first step. And as we encounter more and more stressful events in our life, we slowly progress to becoming slowly sicker. But most of us, what we do is that once we get sick, we try to recover, but often find ourselves recovering even slower and slower. So when you're younger, usually you can go 5 days a week, and on the weekends you can just simply sleep it out, and then Monday, you're ready to go. But for the most part, as we age, this recovery process gets slower as our bodies are compounded, are impacted by more and more stress. So we look to and seek to find stimulants, right? So the most common stimulants that most people will end up using is usually caffeine or coffee. Some it's food, sugary food, for example, or even soda like Coca-Cola. This is just one of those things that we use to cope. After stimulating our body, and that stress or that stressful event lingering in our bodies starts to cause us some adrenal dysfunction, which eventually leads to some poor sleep or insomnia, and eventually leads us to feeling tired. And as long as every day that we're living, that there is more stress, we continue to get sick again, we recover slowly, continue to find other stimulants, and often this cycle perpetuates itself into a never-ending process that leads us to diseases. So we need to break this cycle, and that was what this talk is about. So let's understand the role of stress in our daily life. So there's basically good stress and bad stress. So good stress is good. There's good stress like moderate exercise, or let's say a little work stress is usually adaptive because it usually encourages us to learn. And that's usually quite adaptive for us. Exercise is the most prototypical example of this. But good stress can become bad when it is there for a prolonged period of time. The example I would give here is that you don't see a person running a marathon every single day of the year. They run a marathon 3 or 4 times of 3 or 4 times a year only, right? So when people over exercise, which is one of the things that also does happen, good stress can eventually become bad, especially when there is a background of increased stress levels coming from the psychological or physiological standpoint. Bad stress, no, is generally bad. These are your frustrations, your anxieties, depression. It's generally bad. But in certain instances, bad stress can actually become good in that it allows us to adapt, you know. So for some people, you hear often the statement na, because of what happened to me, I became a stronger person. And in that sense, it's about looking at how that initially bad stress has enabled you to evolve and to adapt into a new person or into new habits that allow you to thrive better. So our body encounters different kinds of stress. There's of course physical stress, exercise being the most common. We lift objects around the house. That's a kind of stress. There's of course emotional and mental stress. So this is where I think most people struggle the most. Deep seated, they have their own anxieties. They have they have trauma from from their past. They're victims of physical, sexual abuse, things like that. And these things linger. There's of course biochemical and inflammatory stress. No, so we're talking about here diseases like cancer, for example, or long-standing diseases such as renal, kidney failure, heart disease, diabetes, or even hypertension is a common inflammatory stress. Then there's physiologic stress. No, so these are things that we do to ourselves. Let's say like in this example, we're taking some alcohol every weekend. A little bit of alcohol does seem to help, but if you're taking too much of it, it causes a certain level of stress on your liver, stress on your heart, elevates your blood sugar, things like that. So, most people understand stress to be just number two. It's all just physical, it's all just emotional and mental related. But in reality, all of these are types of stress that our body undergoes every day. So, typically when we talk about stress, we talk about a hormone in our body called cortisol. And cortisol is a very unique hormone in that there is a diurnal rhythm. That when I say it's a diurnal rhythm, it means that throughout the day the levels do change quite significantly. In a normal individual, the peak of cortisol, sorry about that, the peak of cortisol is usually in the morning. And then as the day progresses, it should go down. Okay. Now, the purpose of having a higher cortisol in the morning is simply to wake you up. Higher cortisol does seem to encourage our wakeful response. And so if we have a poor cortisol elevation, so let's say, for example, you fall on the lower line, for example, then you probably will wake up more or less tired all the time, or you don't feel as rested as you should. In a lot of people who have insomnia, this curve is often flipped. So you have a lower point at the bottom, and they have a higher cortisol towards the end of the day. It is the nature of cortisol that when it is lower at night, it encourages our body to actually produce melatonin, which helps us sleep, and it encourages our body to relax. So when cortisol spikes at night, it goes up at night, that really triggers our body to become very excited, and it leads to a lot of problems when it comes to insomnia. So what's the function of cortisol? So cortisol has good things and bad things going for it. The first thing that cortisol does, is it converts proteins into energy. So basically, if you think about cortisol, what it does in the short term is that it increases blood sugar. So it will get proteins from your muscles, and turn that into sugar so that you have energy for that. It stimulates your liver to convert any amino acids and certain sugars to be released into the blood, and therefore giving you that energy again. Cortisol, of course, is a steroid, and therefore it's a very good countering agent for inflammation and allergies. So if you think about cortisol issues, think about if you have seasonal allergies, if you have chronic allergies at that, cortisol does play a part in that picture. Cortisol also helps maintain blood pressure. So we see a lot of I'm seeing a lot of more elderly patients, where their blood pressure is it seems to be always on the lower side and it keeps getting lower. So cortisol is that thing that actually aids us to maintain our blood pressure. So it's not entirely a bad thing to have cortisol in our lives. It's actually something that is very beneficial for us to in order to survive. And the last thing that cortisol does is it that it aids us in our stress reactions. No, so let's say our house is burning down. No, so cortisol is the first thing that your body will produce to increase your blood sugar in the blood. And after that, you have the energy to actually run out of the house, pick up a few things, pick up your kid, pick up the refrigerator, pick up things that are important, and just simply get out of danger. So cortisol is good in that sense. Short bursts of cortisol are really good, but prolonged cortisol secretion is the problem. So these are the problems now that happen with prolonged stress. Remember, I told you that cortisol is a hormone that generally will increase your blood sugar, right? So when you have cortisol or when your body's under stress for a very, very long time, your body keeps on pushing out cortisol into the bloodstream. And this forces your body to make even more sugar. So I encounter this often in the clinic that, basically their diet's pretty good. They eat well, they eat lots of veggies, very low glycemic, and yet their blood sugar is not well controlled. One of the things that I always will look at in that scenario is looking at cortisol and how bad the stress level of this person is, because that does cause a lot of blood sugar to rise. On the flip side, no, so initially it will rise a lot, but on the flip side, cortisol will also deplete blood sugar. After everything is consumed, it suddenly crashes, right? And this is where most people will experience their fatigue. The other function of prolonged cortisol secretion, remember, it's a steroid, and normally steroids are used as a something to reduce inflammation and also to reduce the immune response. So if you have a lot of cortisol in the blood, basically you get sick more often because it depresses your immune system. Prolonged too much secretion, like I mentioned earlier, leads to less restful sleep because there is less melatonin secretion. It also increases lipid levels of the blood fats, which are your cholesterol markers, right? So, this is also another scenario that we encounter in the clinic a lot, is that when you have people not eating fat anymore, and then they'll complain that, oh, I still have very, very bad cholesterol. This is something that you need to look at, whether their stress is that bad. Are they sleeping well, for example? Water retention is another problem we encounter with prolonged cortisol secretion. So these are the people normally who have unexplained edema, or in Tagalog, pagmamanas. So their heart's fine, their kidneys fine, they're not taking a tremendous amount of salt, and yet they have swelling or water retention on their lower extremities. So this is one of those things that we need to look at. The second to the last here is, of course, we lose some cellular potassium, which can lead to more cramps at night. And then lastly, on the initial part is that, we have reduced insulin sensitivity, which, because of the elevation of the blood sugar for a prolonged period of time, will eventually lead to some diabetes. So short bursts of stress are, really good. But when you have too much of that stress, it causes things to go awry. And when it goes awry, you start to develop diseases like diabetes, hypercholesterolemia, etc. So I'd like to introduce here the concept of the adrenal bank account. So basically, throughout our lifetime, you can think about your adrenal glands, which produce your cortisol, as like a bank account. Over time, it generally will decline, right? What helps it kick up, is that if you deposit, when you deposit into your adrenal bank account, the only way you can do that is by actually sleeping, right? So for those that don't have good sleep, the depletion of this cortisol is much faster, right? So generally, we want this to maintain at a certain level throughout age, but because of the the age phenomena, which generally will cause the cortisol to decline over time, all the more sleep becomes important, no? And you often hear that, I can do fine with sleeping just 4 hours every night or 5 hours every night, you know. But if you look at the long term scenario for their health, it's not something that's very adaptive. It's something that is gonna eventually drain out this adrenal bank account and lead to those problems that we are encountering. All right. So just to recap, the cycle here is that we have a stressful event, get sick, slow recovery, and all of these things. So you follow that on the adrenal bank account, that you get stressed, it starts to drop, you sleep well, you get to kick up, and it continues to go and deplete over time. Once you're at this end point, definitely you are gonna be tired. You're gonna experience something called brain fog. You can't think well, you can't sleep well, and basically you'll be reliant on certain types of stimulants just to get by. So what are the signs of maladaptive stress response? So how do we know that the stress is already too much for us? The first thing is, of course, reliance on stimulation like coffee. So if we find that, okay, we can't get through our day without having a glass of coffee or a glass of tea or something just to stimulate us, just to wake us up, that is already that is usually one of the first signs that you will notice that, okay, the stress is becoming too much for you. And then in conjunction to that, if there is already a need for more than the usual amount of stimulation, then it becomes a real problem. It means that, okay, this is going to be a vicious cycle of stress, stimulate, and you're just going to feel tired, all the more tired in a few months or a year, right? Then there's the increased need for sugary or very high carbohydrate rich food. So when people have tremendous amounts of stress and they find that, okay, they're just craving almost every single day, that's already a sign that, okay, the stress response is already becoming overwhelmed, and you need to somehow intervene or do something about it. The third one here is reliance on medications to thrive. So this is a very common thing to do. So some people, to sleep, they will take an antihistamine, for example, or they will rely on dormicum or some of these sedative medications just to get their sleep, and that's usually quite a maladaptive response. When you have alcohol dependence or drug dependence, this is also one of those things. You need to take alcohol just to relax, or you need to take certain types of drugs, whether it's amphetamines or ecstasy or whatnot, just so that you can feel, that I am responding well to stress, or that you just can just to get away. Sleep deprivation is also another sign of maladaptive stress response. So when you're noticing that your sleep time is shortening for no reason at all, this can be one of those signs that you are having a maladaptive stress response. So the sixth one here is lack of physical activity. So when you're no longer able to exercise, which is generally counter stress, it counters stress very well. So when you're unable to do any physical activity, or you're too lazy, you don't have the energy for it, that tells you already your body's quite overwhelmed. When you don't have enough enriching social connections, so some people, when they are under a lot of pressure, they become hermits, so they start hiding, they start, going away from the social encounters simply because they're also just so tired. They can't think, and they probably don't have enough time for it anymore. And lastly is when you don't have enough exposure to nature. And I always espouse this, that nature is actually the cheapest and the most effortless thing that you can do to actually improve your stress response. So with the current scenario right now, we are due to the COVID pandemic, a lot of people are living in condominiums and they're stuck there. They can't go down to their common areas, they can't go down and get groceries, for example, especially for the seniors. This is a big problem, and exposure to nature, sunlight is really something that's important in order to improve our stress response. So let's talk about coping activities. What these are just some suggestions in order for us to somehow begin to manage our stress. You don't have to do all of this. Most people don't do all of this. Some people do some of it. Some do a combination of it. Regardless, these have been sort of well established as good coping mechanisms that on a physical level we can do to help us relax and to help us just get away from that stressful response so that we're not so much enveloped into it, right? So the first suggestion, of course, is to go for a walk and basically exercise. It doesn't have to be a jog, doesn't have to be a run, but going for a walk outside in nature, whether by yourself, with your family, is always a good idea. And exercise is one of those things that really increases endorphins. Endorphins is a chemical in your brain that makes you feel happier, makes you feel lighter. And so this is something that's really important, right? Listening to music or dancing is also another thing that I really like. No, so one of the techniques actually for relaxation is actually to dance. So dancing to your favorite music, whether you can dance or can't dance, is also okay. But what matters is that try to engage the physical plane. Try to move as much as possible. The third suggestion is that in spite of the cravings you may feel, try to eat a healthier meal all the time. I always encourage that people, do have a regular bowel movement. And why is that? Because all of these excess hormones, excess cortisol, excess estrogen, excess testosterone, the way they're brought out by your body once they're used up is through your feces. So if you're unable to defecate properly, you're not eating enough vegetables, enough nutrients, those become a problem. And the other thing about eating a more balanced meal, a healthier meal, is that when you're stressed, nutrient depletion is actually accelerated, no? Which also will snowball or will cause more problems in terms of your stress response. The fourth item here is to breathe deeply and center yourself. So breathing deeply is something that I really try to encourage all my patients to do. And for them, you'll notice this in most people that are very, very stressed. Look at the person who's very angry. They usually breathe very, very shallowly, and they also breathe very, very quickly. So this is something that you try to do when you're under pressure. Just try to take a pause. Just try to take a deep breath, and just say, and it's okay, right? Journaling is also another thing that we can do. Body scan is one of the methods that mind body medicine also teaches you. Creativity, so things that take your mind off the stressful event. Coloring books, watercolors, crochet, etc. Massage. Unfortunately, right now we cannot go out to get a massage. So if you have a partner at home or someone who can help you out at home, a massage is always very good. Human touch is a well-established way to actually build social connection. So a massage is always great. And gratitude. I think for the most part, a lot of us are not doing this. We don't express gratitude often enough to people around us. So some of the things that we can do on a weekly level, of course, is to spend time with family, look at something beautiful like nature or art, exercise weekly or a daily even. Hobbies, no? So right now it's just a little bit harder because of the pandemic. But if you have a garden, going out to the garden is a good idea. Writing letters. I have a lot of seniors that do this, that are not very tech savvy, that they write letters and then they send it through Grab or something. Massages, again, sleep is a very key important. Make sure that you get adequate sleep, especially if the week has been pretty stressful. And the last two things here are actually the ones that I really like to do. The second to last here is about visualization. So just sit down, play light music at the background. Just imagine yourself at the happiest place you are. Just try to stay there. And sometimes that is already something that takes you away. And the last is to, find a funny movie or book and laugh. Laughter, I think, it's always said that laughter is the best medicine. And I think that, given where we are now, we don't laugh as much as we used to. Most of us are quite worried, especially for those of us that have our loved ones or our people we know that are dealing with this pandemic on a personal level. So laughter, I think, is still one of the things that we really can use to cope. So how do we restore a proper stress response? Just to summarize this, so we avoid certain foods. No, so usually we try to avoid um, very sugary, very sweet foods. Avoiding caffeine or alcohol is also good because at least you don't rely on stimulation just to get by. And I think this helps. The third item here, eating several small meals throughout the day. So no big meal, but 4 to 6 smaller meals throughout the day is usually the way to go because it helps balance your blood sugar and reduce biochemical stress. Try to have a regular sleep schedule that you go to sleep by 10 p.m., right? You have the stress management techniques that we talked about. Sorry. You deal with your emotions as needed. So don't let your emotions linger, right? Laugh, breathe, or even seek professional help. So I work with some psychologists and psychiatrists, and they help our patients with this. No, light exercise is always good, and try to have as much exposure to nature as possible. No, we're trying to avoid nature deficit disorder. Okay. So what types of supplements can we use, no? And what types of nutraceuticals can we use in order to help us manage our stress response? So remember that ultimately managing the response is about dealing with the stressful event or stressful circumstance itself. The supplements and the methods we discussed, they are ways for us to reduce the negative impact of stress on our body, right? But of course, if the stressor is always there, eventually these methods will not work as well as they should, right? So the first category of supplements I have here are what we call adrenal adaptogens, right? So among these, just a few examples are Panax ginseng, ashwagandha, rhodiola, eleutherococcus, and licorice, right? So basically, what the adrenal adaptogens are designed are these are basically herbs, no? And basically, what they do to the body is that they help replenish our adrenal bank account, no? So they help us restore adrenal function and restore the normal amount of cortisol that our body releases, no? Because of the problems we have with nutrients, no, and nutrient support, especially when it comes to someone who's very, very stressed. Usually, you'll need to support them through vitamins and nutrients as well. So the most common that I would prescribe is usually actually vitamin B complex. So vitamin B complex is usually quite depleted in those that are undergoing severe amounts of stress. Vitamin C is useful not just for the flu, not just for COVID prevention, not just for all of that. Actually, vitamin C, the main role of that is actually it helps you produce cortisol properly. So when your body is already quite tired and it's not producing enough cortisol, vitamin C is usually the first thing that I would try, just to make sure that, okay, your adrenal glands can produce or is able to produce cortisol properly. Omega-3s are useful because they are fat. No? So they are fat. They are very, very good energy source. But more than that, they are also anti-inflammatory. And as well, they help absorb some of the damage that the stress causes our body on a physiological level or a biochemical level. Okay, phosphatidylserine is for neurochemistry, and then the probiotics, of course, is for gut balance. No, so probiotics here play a very important role when it comes to supporting someone who's very, very stressed, no? Because in our gut, in our digestive system, it produces about 50 to 80% of the neurotransmitters or the brain chemicals that dictate whether we're very excited, we're very depressed, or whatnot. So having adequate good bacteria in the digestive system is very important. So a good probiotic does help in that. And then secondarily, remember I mentioned that when you are able to defecate properly, you're able to move your bowels every day, right? You are gonna be removing all these excess hormones, excess things, excess waste that reduces the toxic burden on your body. The third group of the third group of agents or nutraceuticals are what I call the calming agents. So these are things that, when you're under a little pressure or a little under stress, are well established to actually reduce the stress, or get you to a calmer state, right? So the first one here, of course, is the first one here, of course, is lavender. So lavender comes in many forms. There's lavender essential oil. So a lot of you can see this all over the marketplace. You diffuse this at night just to help you calm down and relax and sleep. You know, melatonin is also one of those calming agents. So it helps actually engage or create a sense of calm. And for those that have persistent insomnia, before going to or taking any of those narcotic type of sedatives, try to use more melatonin first, and just be guided, because you can adjust the dosage of melatonin from anywhere from about 2 to about 100 milligrams every night. So it depends on the person, but be guided by a healthcare professional when you do that. The third item here is chamomile. Of course, this one is like a tea, and chamomile is a well-known calming agent. So for some people that are very, very caffeine sensitive, chamomile is that alternative tea to take that has no caffeine. The last agent, which I didn't write down simply because of controversy, is CBD, or CBD oil. No, so it's not yet, of course, in the market. It's quite illegal still, but of course, that is one of those things that may be up and coming in the future. So just to sum it up, it's not stress that really kills us. It's not the stressful event that kills us. It's how we react to it. And so if we perpetuate our stress by reacting poorly to it, or by not adapting to it, or by not or by not adopting measures that reduce that stress response, we will develop diseases. And those diseases can be anything from diabetes to hypertension to cancer, neurologic diseases like Alzheimer's, etc. So stress is really that thing that you will encounter every single day of your life. But what is more important is that we need to react to it properly, and we need to adopt measures that help us reduce that stress response. So thank you. And that ends my presentation for this morning.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stan, for that very informative session. I hope our viewers were able to take note of the very practical tips that they can incorporate in their day-to-day activities to help manage the daily stresses. Okay, so looks like we've got some question in our FB Live. Let me go through some of them. Okay, so one viewer asked from Dr. Heidi, how do I know if I should already see a professional help in managing my stress levels?
So when you are already very, very overwhelmed, and you find that your quality of life is already affected, meaning you absolutely cannot sleep anymore in the night, you absolutely cannot function at work, you absolutely cannot think anymore, it's about time that you already sought professional help. By professional help in that instance, I mean to go into the drug route, meaning going to a psychiatrist or a psychologist, for example. But earlier on in the process, when you realize that, okay, my sleep is not the same as it should, you already try to look for someone that can help you manage that, or you're already noticing, oh, I'm not as alert as I used to. It's not wrong to already seek help very early on, but normally I would reserve the period where you need to use drugs or psychotropics or whatnot towards the latter part, not as the first step.
Okay. Another question from one of our viewers. Can prolonged stress cause some infertility issues also?
Oh, yes. So one of the major fertility issues that happen, especially to women, is actually polycystic ovarian syndrome. So polycystic ovarian syndrome does change how your hormones are. So you become more androgenic, right? So you don't ovulate as well as you should, and usually leads to a more irregular cycle. So that is one effect of prolonged stress. The second thing about stress, if you look at women that have very, very long cycles, they're usually under a lot of pressure, or they don't. There are some women, especially of the reproductive age less than 30, that don't have a very regular menstrual cycle. So that leads to that problem of fertility as well, because we do know fertility correlates well with regularity of cycles. In men, it reduces fertility count. So we do need to help our patients. We do need to help them improve their stress, because if we can't, if they're trying to get a baby, for example, or have a baby, it's actually a problem. And the last thing that I'll just put out there regarding fertility is that you'll notice, I'm noticing that um, in the last maybe 5 or 6 years, there are more and more sort of infertile couples. They can't get pregnant for one reason or another, and it still boils down more or less to what their stress is actually, and identifying it.
Okay. So Miss Clarice asked, does melatonin work for everybody? I have tried melatonin to help me sleep, but it seems not to work. I've taken to up to 20 milligrams. I'm not sure, but it seems to have an opposite effect.
Okay, so melatonin doesn't work as well for if you've already or are starting on taking any form of like an antidepressant or a narcotic sedative. So it doesn't work it doesn't usually work as well as those that have never taken it. With regards to the dosage, so if 20 isn't enough yet, you can actually increase that further, but make sure to be guided by your physician. The one thing that I would say that would sort of like limit you in terms of the dosage of melatonin is that if you're waking up tired or you're having nightmares or very, very vivid dreams already, then the dosage is, you can only go that far. And so if melatonin does not work for you at that point, you have to change route. The other thing is that there might be another reason why melatonin is not working, is you need to identify, okay, are there certain things you're doing in the night that is causing your cortisol to continue to be elevated as well? Or sometimes in some people, they're taking chocolate or they're taking caffeine and they're caffeine sensitive. So melatonin doesn't work as well also in those instances.
Okay. Another question from Sir John. When is the best time to exercise? I usually find it very hard to sleep when I work out in the afternoon.
Yeah, so best time to exercise is usually in the morning, because exercise does increase cortisol. So you don't want that cortisol surge late in the night. So when you exercise, try to, I usually prefer anytime before 4 p.m. If you're able to incorporate some exercise already at that point, the better. At the same time, if you can make it outdoors, that's even better, because that will encourage your body to engage in nature and also get some sunlight, and which normalizes or balances also stress response.
Okay. Question from Dr. Cathy. What can I drink to lower my cholesterol, doc? Is this stress related?
Oh, so that one you'll have to ask. You have to talk to a medical professional about, because of course, cortisol is not just a stress issue. There are many factors that cause an elevated stress. There are many reasons why cholesterol will be elevated apart from stress. So genetics is one, diet is the other. Medications also do cause that problem. Thyroid disorders, so in particular hypothyroidism, do cause elevations of your cholesterol as well. There's also the part on sleep. So it may not just all be about stress. You'll have to talk to someone who can sort of engage you in that discussion and try to figure out, okay, what's wrong with the profile here.
Okay. So another question. I find myself craving for unhealthy food when I'm stressed. Is this normal?
Yes, it's very, very normal, because you do need that surge of sugar. Remember I mentioned that, when you have cortisol, it raises your blood sugar. It tries to push sugar into the blood, but eventually all that sugar gets cleared. So you have this crash that happens after. It's when that crash happens that you'll start to look for things that you need to nibble on or pick on and crave on. So it's actually one of those maladaptive responses that we do. It's just a strong craving.
Okay, so I think this is our last question. Is stress is a big factor in eczema?
Yes. So a lot of the types of dermatitis out there, atopic dermatitis, different types of psoriasis, of course, seborrheic dermatitis, they all somehow um, they are all somehow related to stress. And the reason for that is that remember that cortisol is an immune regulator. It reduces inflammation. So when our body has too much stress, and that adrenal bank account starts to run out, you won't be able to produce enough of that cortisol anymore. And so your body's normal anti-inflammatory mechanisms won't be able to suppress the swelling on the skin and prevent you from having eczema or psoriasis.
All right, so there are more questions left, but we are running out of time. We will be replying to your queries after with the webinar through your Viber or email account. For any follow up questions that you may have, or for those who want to schedule a one on one online session with Dr. Stan or any of our in house doctors, drop us a line through our Facebook or Instagram page, or you may also contact our hotline number 0917 866 2689. Again, that's 0917 866 2689. For those looking for nutraceutical support to help manage stress, visit our website at www.biobalanceinstitute.com. Use the promo code BALANCESTRESS and get exclusive discounts. Stress will always be part of our lives. Let's all find balance amidst the different stressors and thrive. Thank you again for joining us, and we hope to see you again in our next webinar.